Yeah. Well, yeah. Hi, Niels. Nice to see you again. How are you?
Good. Hi, Leda. Good to see you also. Is the sound working?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you nice and clear.
I hear you clearly, and I see Nikki also now,
Yeah,
Oh,
hi, Nick.
hi,
and,
Niels.
and Rafa.
Oh,
Hi,
Rafa
good
grown
morning.
beard.
How are you? Can you hear
I,
me?
I,
Yes,
uh,
perfect.
perfect.
Good.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Wow, we already have more than 10 people.
Looking good.
Yeah. And I already introduced my first link, Wim.
Yeah,
Where are
just
you
just
from,
wait a bit.
guys?
We're not we haven't started yet. I first have to explain what's the idea now. Otherwise, I have to repeat it a couple of times.
That's true.
People are so early. Normally, I'm 5 minutes too late.
I just realized that it seemed to be that the Zoom ID number is different on the program and on the leaflet because I struggled with one ID. Perhaps I've just made a technical mistake, but that was my conclusion because the first number I found didn't work. So I don't know if that's an issue that could that it seems
Okay.
that there are two different numbers for the Zoom meeting.
Do you know
Yeah.
which one worked? The poster or the program?
Poster.
Yeah, I think I used
Poster works, but not from the
the
program.
poster one is this one we're on now. The program I think had a different number. Perhaps I misunderstood that.
No,
Just
you're correct. It's from the program, it doesn't work. But from the
yeah.
poster, it's working. It's different number.
Okay. Thanks for alerting us to that. I'll keep an eye on the emails if people problems joining.
I think I mostly share the poster. So
I did log in from the link I shared on the Facebook group or Track and Waterfall Specialist group.
Yeah, the people I invited was also in an email and with with a separate link in their email message, so that works.
Yeah, I just joined from that Zoom link in the invitation.
Yeah. Thanks. Good good morning, everybody. We'll still give it some time for people to join. But welcome. Um, So today we have some great speakers coming up soon. We also would like to introduce in this webinar some interaction with you. So we will share questions with you through a link that we will put in the chat. Hopefully that will work, and by using this link, you can vote on questions, and then you will see the result. But of course, we will share later on the overall results on a couple of the questions we will share during this webinar. And the first one is to try to see where everybody comes from. So if you have to open the link, and then you can put in the country you're from, and then we will see how much of the world we cover here. I'm going to try to do that myself as well. Oh, wow. Scotland.
And
That's
Bulgaria are
amazing.
leading, yes.
Amazing. What a nice tool. So yeah, it's probably with most of you, if you're around my age, this experiencing this new digital world and trying to find out. It's nice to see where everybody comes from.
So Vim, it's a complicated question. What do you mean by where do you come from?
Well,
Where are you born? Where
put
do you live? Where
no,
do you work?
where you are now, or where you feel that like let's say the work area. But if you feel still, if there's a difference between the country you were born and you feel more connected to that one, please feel free. It's freedom of speech still in BirdLife webinars. So.
Okay, I added one just to give you a left field.
Thanks. So everybody, if you use the link in the so don't try to put the answer in the chat, but please use the links, because then we can also we can track the results and share it with you later on. And then if you use that link, you can also directly see the results yourself. So thanks very much, everybody. I'm giving the floor now to Nikki to introduce the speakers, and then Nikki, maybe after that, since people are still putting in their country, after you've done the introduction, we'll do the overall question, the threads, if that's okay for you. Thanks, Nikki.
Thanks, Wim. Yes, I have the pleasure to introduce our renowned speakers today. And yeah, I have had the pleasure of meeting them on a number of occasions. Niels Kanstrup is our first speaker. He's a wildlife biology scientist at the Aarhus University. I had the pleasure working with him on our red-breasted goose life project, organizing several trainings where he was a lecturer. And one important aspect of his background is also that he's practicing an active hunter, which gives additional perspective in his work and presentations. He's been working with the Danish Hunters Association, also been a member of the EVA technical committee, and yeah, quite extensive experience on the hunting issues related to migratory water birds conservation. The second speaker, Rafa Mateo, who is joining us from faraway Argentina. Thanks for joining us, Rafa. He's been deeply involved in different studies on toxicology and wildlife toxicology. He's been doing a lot of work on the impact of lead, especially originating from hunters' ammunition onto wildlife, water birds as well. We worked with him again on one of the red-breasted goose projects, looking into lead content into the wintering geese in Bulgaria. And he's now, after 20 years working in the Institute of Game and Wildlife Research, he's moved now to the Environmental Toxicology Group of the Institute of Environmental Assessment and Water Research in Barcelona. And he'll speak about the lead poisoning as an issue for water birds. And the last speaker is Julius, whom again we've met on a number of occasions, again linked to geese meetings and goose research, who is based in Lithuania, working for the Lithuanian BirdLife partner, and if I'm not mistaken, Klaipėda Coastal Research and Planning Institute, yes. So he's been doing quite a lot of research on bycatch in the Baltic area in the recent years. So he'll share his knowledge and experience on this. And thanks to all the speakers for accepting the invitation to give this presentation today. Back to you, Wim.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki, and of course welcome to all the speakers. It's really amazing that they could make time for us to do this presentation. So we organized these webinars. This is the second in a row. I will put my email in the chat later on. So if you're new to this series of webinars, this is the second one in a row of 4. If you want to be invited to the next one and you're not on the list yet, meaning you didn't get an email from me yet, you can send me a message that you want to invite it for the next ones as well. So we do this as BirdLife Europe and Central Asia Secretariat, and with the great help of our Bulgarian BirdLife partner BSVB. Without them, it would not be possible to do this. So thanks very much, Nikki and colleagues. I see there are a couple of new people in the group. So we're using in the chat a link to the Slido app where we will ask you some questions about the webinar on the content on the threats to the birds. The first question was, you see in the chat, was on and which country you're working from. If you haven't done that, you can still fill that out. And Lila, if you could share the next one, please. So the one that coming up now is on asking you on what do you think in your country where you work are the major threats to water birds. So if you use that link, you can see the results, but of course we will feedback the results to you as well. So thanks very much, and Niels, welcome, and over to you. That's okay.
Oh, thank you so much, all of you. Thank you, Wim, for inviting me for this webinar. Thank you, Nikki, for the nice and overwhelming introduction. I hope it was so well, all what you said. Anyhow, I choose this theme here, the disturbance from hunting and how it can be managed. And I try to share my screen here. Does it work? It works.
Yes.
So this is just the first page, just to direct you to the title of the presentation, which is disturbance from hunting and how it can be managed. And the content here for these 20 minutes is that I'll start with a couple of models and then some definitions, and then look at the disturbance and its impacts, and then one management option, because we have many management options concerning disturbance, but one of them is this spatial approach, hunting regulation zones. And I'll give a couple of examples that we have had in Denmark that we can use also wider than just in one country. And all this leading to what we regard in Denmark as a win-win situation, where we are concerned about the birds, but also all this interest in hunting, which is a large interest in most countries. So if things can be combined, we realize that to be a win-win. And I should say that this is mainly based on Danish experience and practice, but it should be like an inspiration also for other countries. And we have also been inspired from other countries. This is certainly not a national approach. This is just as much an international and a flyway approach. I've used this tool very often to explain how it's like this box where you have 3 dimensions. And you can look at these dimensions where you have that could be a regulation, or it could be another way of management. But you have on the first axis here the temporal. This is very obvious that you have temporal management of hunting, open seasons. That's very common, and the most common in Denmark. Some countries have open weeks. We don't have that. Some have open days. We only have that in a few sites. It could also be open hours, and we also have that in Denmark. And I know that's the approach also in many countries. So one way of managing hunting is to have a temporal, a time-wise approach. Another one is the spatial connected to the hunting areas. That could be on the hunting right, who has the hunting right, how is that regulated? And you could then build up what I already mentioned in the beginning here, sanctuaries, zoning, and other spatial approaches. And that is also very common in many countries. I think it's one of the most, apart from the open seasons, of course, but I'll come back to this. My examples later in this presentation will be concentrated on the spatial approaches. And then, of course, methodologies, hunting methods, the type of hunting. Are you chasing the birds? Are you just waiting, decoying for water birds when you hunt them? This has 2 very different impacts on disturbance and on the impact of disturbance. If you use boats, we do that very much in Denmark, but in other countries, how you approach the hunting area, what type of equipment, vehicles, and so on do you use, and also bag limits. I see that as a kind of method which is used in many countries, that hunters can have a maximum of how much they can harvest per hour or per hunting day or whatever. So that's also what I see as a method approach, which is, and you could supply this model with many other tools. I just want also to mention hunting pressure, because many people use the word hunting pressure, and in my opinion, in a more restricted way. I think it should be seen very open, and I look at the hunting pressure as an additive, as a sum of many different impacts. One is the harvest. It's very often that people think that the hunting pressure is just the harvest, how many animals are harvested, and that is then the hunting pressure. But also the non-harvested but hit animals, the wounded, should be included in the hunting pressure, and not least the disturbance, which is also in this pie here. It's a very important part of the hunting pressure. The landscape, what landscape fingerprint does hunting have with shooting blinds and design of the hunting landscape, which is also part of hunting pressure in my opinion. And then also something that I've been working with, but which Rafa will cover in the next presentation, the ammunition. What do we leave behind us when we go home from hunting? How much gunshot have we left? How many empty cartridges have we left in the habitat? So that's also, in my opinion, a part of the hunting pressure, and you could perhaps find additional elements in this pie. When it comes to disturbance, and as I said, I think that should be seen as a part of the broad definition of uh, hunting pressure. And I, because we discussed today disturbance from hunting, but it's important also to see disturbance sources from other activities, human activities in nature. But if you take disturbance from hunting, it's mainly about the shooting. If hunting is successful, it also includes shooting. Otherwise, it's a bit boring. That's my personal opinion. So there's shooting, which is noisy, and then of course is scaring for birds and perhaps also people in the neighborhood. But at least the shooting and the noise from shooting is a very important source of disturbance when hunting. Also, the traffic, driving, sailing, walking in the area. So it's not only the shooting as such, but it's also that the hunters have access to a hunting area and they are there for a while, some hours or perhaps a full day. So even if they're not shooting, they have a kind of impact seen in terms of disturbance. And then also the use of dogs, because we not commonly use dogs when we retrieve what has been shot, and dogs, which are seen from a natural point of view, a predator, could also have a certain disturbance impact, which should be regarded as a part of the hunting disturbance. And again, perhaps you see other elements of this in other countries, but these are the main three elements I see from my angle. And then disturbance from other sources, people having access. Today we see that tourism is a very important part of local nature use, and it's nowadays, at least in Denmark, it's almost all year round. When I was a kid, tourism was a summer thing, but today, when everything is so mild and people have very much freedom, tourism and access, outdoor life for many people is just as much in the wintertime and during the staging and wintering periods of migratory birds. So it's certainly something that should be built into our complete understanding of disturbance. And again, this is the access. It's the traffic, the driving, sailing, walking, kite surfing is so important, or so popular in Denmark right now. So we have many places where people kite surf all year round in shallow watered wetlands, where there's really an impact on staging birds, much more in fact than you would see from hunting in the same areas. And again, loose dogs, which I think is an issue in all countries and something that we should certainly be aware of in our understanding of this. And what is important about these different sources, that the birds don't really distinguish. They don't care where the disturbance come from. So it's like additive, and also these different disturbance sources are mutually related. So hunting could induce like a kind of disturbance that then would enhance or increase the impact of other types of disturbances simply by changing the habit or whatever, the behavior of birds. So the impact of disturbance, no matter what is the source, is that it may be changed behavior, longer flight distances, more shy birds, and so on, which could then affect them no matter what is the source of disturbance. And then, so of course, the changed use of habitats and the use of less optimal habitats. And I have some examples of that later in the presentation. Also, the increased energy consumption. The more these birds have to move around because they get disturbed from one place to the other, the more energy they use and the more food they need. And this may be even a evil or bad spiral that we get these birds involved in. And then, of course, a potential impact on conservation status. And we may see that for some species, and for other species, this does not really have not a net impact. We see on at least the Danish population of many of the goose species that they increase and they get massively disturbed by hunting, but still, because they have so good access to agricultural areas, it seems like their conservation status is not directly threatened by disturbance because this is mitigated by colossal food supply from agricultural areas. But that only applies to geese, or at least some goose species, but other waterbird species may be much more pressed. So how can our model be used here? Disturbance can be managed on all dimensions here, but also by methods. The hunting type is very important. Also, of course, open seasons and open hours and so on. So these are powerful tools in managing disturbances. But what I chose here, because I only have 20 minutes, just to take like one dimension here, and that is the spatial approach, which from my perspective seems to be one of the most powerful ways of managing disturbance. And just before the final few slides here, I have a disclaimer because these examples are given from Denmark and from places where the hunting right is free for everybody living in Denmark. And of course, that gives a huge potential for hunting practice and for hunting disturbances. So, and that's different from most other European countries. So of course, you should take this into account when understanding these examples that I give here. This is a study that was made many years ago when I was a youngster. I'm not a youngster anymore. It's made by one of my good friends and colleagues, Jesper Madsen, who you all know. And he looked at the use of widgeon and brent geese in the Wadden Sea. And what you see here, can you see my arrow on the screen? Okay. You see here Susra bed here in an area in the Wadden Sea, and this is the widgeon use when there's no shooting. And this is the widgeon use when there is shooting, and the dots here are the hunters. So you see that the widgeons, they are not stupid. They are not where the hunters are. So they simply disappear from the areas where the hunting is going on. And what you see underneath it, that's the brent geese. They're not huntable, but still they react also on the disturbance. Disturbance is not selective on the species that we hunt, but it affects all present species. And you see again here, this is where you have the food, the sustra, and this is where you have the birds when there's no hunting or shooting. And this is where you have the birds where there's just like here, 5 hunters or boats. We are talking about boats here. So simply they move away from the hunting area. But when the night, because we also manage hunting in this area by temporal tools, so there's no night shooting here, then suddenly you see that the birds adapt to getting into this popular eating place, foraging place, when the hunters are back home watching TV. So again, you see there's a kind of mitigation. The birds react and compensate here, and then they just change their behavior and start to feed during night. I believe that many of you have heard of the Danish, what we called experimental reserves, also made by Jesper Madsen many years ago now, but still they are very valid examples of how disturbance what is the impact of disturbance and what is a potential management tool. And you see here for some of these, this is a mallard, teal and widgeon. Before a reserve was established in 1989, this is how it was used, and you can see clearly here how much the population increased after there was a regulation on hunting. And you see exactly the same here with shoveler and pintail. And this is a spatial approach where you can see how birds react here in the blue shaded area, sub areas here, what they research hunting ban. They collect where there's no hunting. A result from one of the experimental research. All this is published, so I won't go into more details here, also because my time is running out. So just some general conclusions from these studies that were made in Denmark, and also I would say from my personal experience, because I have followed this and I've been a hunter all these decades, and I've seen it also from a hunting point of view. So the hunting activities as they were practiced led to considerable disturbance of water birds and reduced the way or even made it impossible for birds to use these areas. Before these reserves were made, the staging populations of birds here were held well below what was the carrying capacity. So the hunting really meant that the birds did not use these habitats in an optimal way. And I think there was a general conclusion that this was unsustainable seen from a conservation point of view. And I think also the hunters, when they saw this result, they agreed that this was not um, this was not sustainable. This was something that needed to be changed in a way, and that's why also there was broadly a positive attitude to establishing these reserves that are still there and are still popular even among the hunters. I think today, if we suggested that we should abandon these reserves, the hunters wouldn't accept that because they see it as a good tool of more reasons. But first of all, because was the overall conclusion that we got much more birds, not only in the areas where the hunting was banned in the zones with hunting uh, restrictions, but also in the hunted areas, because we found out that the birds, when they had these zones where they could roost and stage without being disturbed from hunting, they would stay in the area for many more days and months, even giving much more potential for hunting in the surrounding areas. So in fact, we saw this as a win-win. We got more space for the birds to feed in protected and undisturbed areas, and then in the surrounding areas, the hunters got more opportunities to harvest these birds populations. So I think overall, seen now in a 30 years perspective, even more, these reserves that were made at that time was a success, and they have been like the tool. They have been like system that we have used in a much wider system of reserves in Denmark. And I think they have also been of inspiration for other countries. So I think that was my 20 minutes. Thank you so much, Wim. And yeah, I think we take questions afterward. You decide that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks very much, Niels, and thank you for making time for us. I guess most of us are from the conservation world, and I know you as well, but we are the non-hunting part of that world. But thank you so much for giving this insight from the hunting perspective on these elements, because it's always an eye opener. And yes, if we do have two questions to ask you in the chat on the topic of Niels. Lila, maybe you can put the first one already. So for those who just came in later, in the chat we put a link to a question on the topic. And if you use that link, you can already see immediately what all the colleagues are answering. So it will not take you away from the Zoom meeting or so. It's just an additional element. So thank you very much for using that. Actually, the question on the overall question on the threats, which do you think it's the most important threat for water birds? 24 of you respond already to that, and 90% of you said it was habitat loss, which is often the case, of course, for species, and also the most challenging one, or at least one of the most challenging ones to give an answer to. So thanks very much for using this interactive tool. And so on Neil's topic on hunting dispersants, we have two questions. So please try to use those. They're both in the chat. Unless there is a burning question, and potentially if you need to leave the meeting now, then just raise your hand. Otherwise, we go over to Rafa to look more at the lead ammunition pollution, and then we come back to the questions after our third speaker. Then we have time for discussion and more and going more in depth. But thanks very much, and Rafa, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Good. Okay. Good morning, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this webinar. I'm going to present this topic about the lead poisoning. Looking for the talk. Let's see. Can you see my presentation? Okay.
Yes.
So yes, I'm going to talk about this topic, lead poisoning, which is very well-known topic for many of you. And I'm going to focus a bit more on the current scenario we have, this moment of in which we have a ban in most of the European countries, at least in the European Union, and the need to check how is the implementation of this ban and the compliance of this ban and the effects on birds, on the exposure to the birds. Are we reducing the exposure to the birds right now, or do we need more time, or how are the hunters complying with this regulation or not? Yeah, as probably you know, the lead poisoning in birds is produced, of course, by lead ammunition, or at least one of the most important sources of exposure is lead ammunition. And then we have two types of species. That on one side, the birds with a muscular gizzard, which tend to confuse the lead shot pellets that are present in soil or in the sediment of lakes or marshes with particles of grit. Here you can see the grit of a poacher, of a common poacher, in which you can see this gravel, these particles of grit, very similar size to the lead shot, and this is probably one of the most important reasons for the ingestion of lead ammunition in wetlands where the grit particles are usually scarce. But it is also present in upland birds like the partridges or pheasants. And the other group at risk is the birds of prey and scavengers, because they prey on animals that have been hunted with lead ammunition. It can be lead shot, like small game, in the case of the small game, but also particles or fragments of bullets that tend to break into very, very small pieces, and sometimes hundreds of pieces of fragments, and they can be also a source of exposure to these birds of prey, especially scavengers. In the case of wetlands, well, the problem is the accumulation of very high densities of lead shot in the bottom of these wetlands marshes. Here you can see the densities that we have seen in different wetlands across Europe. In many places, especially in the Mediterranean coast, probably because there's a higher concentration in birds in smaller wetlands and a higher hunting intensity. The densities can be as high as 300, 200 pellets per square meter. Usually, many of these studies in the upper 20 centimeters of semen, but this is a very, very high density of lead shot. So the animals that are feeding in these places or taking grid have a very, very high probability of ingesting lead shot. Something similar occurs in upland areas, of course, but the densities tend to be smaller. In some places with driving hands, for red partridge or pheasants, the densities are also quite high. If we go to because I know that this same webinar was a bit more focused on some Eastern countries, no? In at least the only data we have from Bulgaria, the densities there were a bit smaller than the values that we saw in the Western Mediterranean, but they are still present, or we can detect this lead shot in places like Durankulak Lake or Shabla, marshes, etc. And well, what is the result of this high prevalence of ingestion of lead shot in the mallards? The way to study that in most of the cases, or this way, is the examination of the gizzard, and using the mallard as an indicator, and of course the gizzard of hunted birds. No, so this can be more or less a random sampling. And taking the mallard as an indicator, we can see this picture, no? in the prevalences observed in different studies across different countries. Again, some of the highest prevalences are present in the Mediterranean area, but also in other countries across Europe. Prevalences that are in some cases above 20 or 30% of the birds. And for some species, as you will see later, it can be as much as 70% of the birds with ingested lead ammunition, lead shot. Another way to do this monitoring, which is a little bit more difficult to interpret, is the use of non-invasive samplings like fecal analysis. We did this with the red-breasted goose and with fronted goose there in Bulgaria because it was, let's say, a bit more difficult to trap these animals or to hunt these animals, or it was not allowed. So it was a way to study, especially relating the lead presence with soil ingestion, trying to see how many samples had higher levels than expected from the soil content of lead. No? So in that case, in fact, only one of the white-fronted goose had like a level of lead that could be different from the rest of the animals. No? But as I say, it's a method that is more difficult to interpret, and it's much better to use a more invasive method like the examination of the gizzard. So in these places where we have to do monitoring to study the implementation, to the compliance and the results of the ban, I would recommend to continue with the study of gizzards. Well, what is the result of this exposure? I did this review years ago, for this congress in Boise, organized by Peregrine Fund, and with all the data of lead poison, about lead poisoning studies across Europe, from 75,000 birds that had been analyzed, we could estimate this mortality. About 8.7% of the population would be at risk of being poisoned by lead shot ingestion. And this is done according to the distribution of pellets the number of pellets in the gizzards of this species, which is something that I obtained from other studies. If we compare the prevalences in Europe with North America, in general, we had, at least before the ban, of course, we had higher prevalences of lead shot ingestion, especially in species like pintail. You can see it can be on average, this is the total value, the average value for Europe, it is close to 30%. North America mortality was 2-3% per year. In Europe, we could estimate this 8.7%, close to 1 million of birds. There's many other adverse effects of lead in the birds, not only the mortality. There are some other sublethal effects can lead also to mortality, of course, like effects on the cellular immune function here. You can see that here we correlated the levels of lead in the actual of of some ducklings that we had we raised them in captivity, but they were from the wild. And we could see this negative correlation between the cellular immune function and the eggshell, the lead in the eggshell, or the lead in the blood of the ducklings. The correlation was similar. And in fact, the levels, those ducklings that were born or at the first third day of hatching, had levels of more than 100 nanograms per milliliter. As you can see here, they died in the first days. So only survived those animals with less than 100 nanograms per milliliter. There are also adverse effects on the reproduction. This has been less studied in the wild, and this is only a study that we did in captivity with partridges. But we could see a reduction in the hatching rate, a reduction in the acrosomal integrity, which is the tip of the spermatozoa. This is something we can also observe in some other studies we have done in mammals, or it can be observed also in humans. And the motility, the motility of the spermatozoa. So yes, we can find more effects on reproduction that probably right now we are not studying, or we have not studied in the wild. And of course, some other very well-known effects like the production of the heme group because of a reduction of the aminolevulinic acid dehydratase, the enzyme that is producing these porphyrins and the heme group. No? As you can see here, this is data that we have from several species of birds of prey from Spain, and as you can see, the decline or the reduction of the activity of this enzyme, which is important for the production of the hemoglobin, it is totally inhibited in some cases, no? Especially with birds with more than 100 or 200 ppbs in blood, it is almost totally inhibited. Of course, all these effects can have effects on population levels or population trends. It is always difficult to study the impact of contaminants on populations, but at least if we look at the data we had from the second half of the 20th century, the population trends, I compiled with from these different species, and we correlate this with the prevalence of lead shot exposure. We can see that those species with lowest population trends or negative population trends are those that had also highest prevalences of lead poisoning. There are probably many other causes, of course, not for these declines or for these negative trends, but probably lead poisoning is one of them. And more recently, some models have been done for birds of prey, and it is known that lead, or they have shown that the populations can be 6% smaller with lead poisoning than they would be without the effects of this poisoning, especially in white-tailed eagle, animals or birds of prey that are closely related to wetlands, but also the golden eagle. Well, we are now in a scenario of a regulation of a total ban in wetlands, at least in the European Union. We had these scenarios or these pictures in the previous years. No? You can see it has been a process that has been improving, no? in the last decades. No? From the first country, it was Denmark, no? In the 86, I think, 1986. So now we have this different scenario. We have a regulation, but we have to know if this regulation there's a compliance or compliance of this or not. Well, I did this study in Spain, and it was before the European ban. It was after the Spanish ban in 2001. It was the ban. In fact, it was implemented a bit later in places like in the Ebro Delta in the Mediterranean coast. It was more implemented by the year 2003. And here you can see the compliance we had in 2007, 2008. There was still a high number of animals that had been shot because we X-rayed the animals, we collected all the pellets that we could from these animals and identified the material. And it was a quite high number of samples, no, to have a good percentage. And as you can see here, 27% of the birds at this time had only lead shot in their bodies. So the compliance at that time was not very good. This is an information we gave to the administration, to the public administration, and they reinforce the regulation. I mean, they put more effort to control the hunters that when they were hunting, checking the materials they were bringing in their bags, etc. So it is very important. No? So if you don't control or you don't have any assessment of the compliance, nobody knows what is going on. And probably if the hunters they have both materials in the market, probably they're going to be using lead in many cases. And in fact, the non-compliance in other countries, like in England, has been quite high, no? 70% in that study of Chromie. But it was higher, or it was good in the compliance in other cases, like in the United States or in Denmark, as you can see here too. The following years, you can see the compliance was quite good. Of course, we had some birds with lead and steel at the same time. But this was because the ban in the Ebro Delta only applied to the marshes, to the lagoons, not to the rice fields. So at some time there could be some animals that had been shot in the rice fields and they were killed in the lagoons. Right now the scenario is different, and I would like to do another study to check if everywhere, also in the rice fields, the hunters are only using steel shot. Of course, this has an effect on the quality of the meat and the safety of this meat. Here you can see the levels in the muscle, and levels depending on if the animals have ingested or not lead shot, or if they have been shot with lead or with steel. No, and of course, both reasons are relevant for the contamination. The ingestion of lead shot is very important because all the absorbed lead is going to contaminate the meat. Every part of the animal is going to be contaminated. And in the case of the ammunition that is crossing the animal, of course, it leaves some small particles, and it can leave some contamination along the path of the ammunition. What is the effect of this change, of this regulation? Well, has been, or at least between the 90s and after the national ban in Spain, there was a significant reduction of several species. It was not total in this period of time. It was only 4 years, probably, since the total ban. But as you can see here, for some species, the prevalence was almost the same. No? The sample size is not too high, but we were still in the 70s, 70% or more than 70%. So what does it mean? So it means that we still have a lot of lead shot pellets in the soils, in the sediments. Here I put the example of Tablas de Daimiel National Park, which is here. This is a protected wetland, and hunting is not allowed since 1963. 33 years later, we did this study, and we detected these densities of pellets per hectare. This is not square meter, but this would be around, this would be 60, for instance, no pellets per square meter. And you can see here in total, in these 20 centimeters, there were close to 1 million of pellets. So 30 years after with that distribution in depth, of course, but the pellets are still there. And in fact, we did another study, in 2010 to 21, in that place, which is called El Puesto del Rey, the blind of the king, let's say, where the King Alfonso XII used to hunt there. And you can see here the distribution of lead shot pellets in the different angles, no, different directions. And here you can see that there's a very important accumulation, and close to 500,000 or 50 pellets per square meter are still present. This is almost more than 60 years after the ban. No? So the pellets are still there. No? So they are going to produce poisoning in many of the birds. We have been assigning a method to reduce lead shot ingestion by increasing the density of grit in some of these wetlands or in some of these places in the Ebro Delta, no? Especially in that area. And with the collaboration of hunters, we put many tons of this grid, different types of grid, in their hunting blinds, around their hunting blinds. They used to bait with grain around the hunting blinds, so it was easy for them to apply with the grain some amount of grid. What is the result of this? Well, here you can see the prevalences that we had in the pre-ban, ban, and the period after the implementation of this grid supplementation. And in general, you can see that the lead shot ban is going to reduce the lead shot ingestion in all of them. In the case of the pintail, we saw that there was no reduction at the beginning. After several years later, and also with the implementation of the grid supplementation, there was some reduction in the prevalence. But something interesting is to look at the ingestion of shot in general, not only the lead, but also the steel shot. And here we could see that in these two species with the highest prevalence of shot ingestion, steel and lead, because of course, when they don't eat steel, they are not taking lead shot, but they are still taking steel shot, no? for the gizzard, because let's say that the steel is replacing the lead. You can see here that the supplementation with grid reduces also the ingestion of general shot pellets in the bird. So this could be an alternative, no? Especially in those areas with very high contamination, if we want to reduce the contamination or the exposure in the birds in a shorter time, because the other option is just to wait for a settlement of the pellets and to be less accessible. The positive thing of this project was the participation of the hunters. They wanted to reduce lead poisoning. They wanted to find solutions, and I think it was a way to make hunters more aware of the problem. And it was, I think, it was interesting, no, to have this involvement of the hunters. So, and in fact, in the Ebro Delta, the hunters, I know, or I expect, or they say that they're mostly shooting with steel shot right now in rice fields, and they have seen that it's a good alternative. But probably not. This is not the case in other places, no. So thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much, Rafa. It's great to see this and also this new information. So for everybody, we will take questions after our next speaker. But we also have a question for you in the chat to answer. Lila, if you can put it on the poisoning of lead ammunition. So just go to the link and give your answer, and then you also see the results. Thank you very much, Rafa, again, and I will see you later on for questions. Julius, are you ready? Then the floor is yours.
Yeah, sorry. Probably you can hear
Thank
me
you.
now.
We see your presentation well. We hear you well.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, so I want to introduce the job what we did in the north, comparing with the information what we just saw. Thank you for the opportunity to present, and I will be telling the story about finally how we succeed to find some solution to reduce the seabird bycatch or diving ducks bycatch, so it could work both. So we had a project in the Baltic Sea in Lithuania. We have very short coastline of just 90 kilometers area, so it was quite easy to know most of the fishermen and to work with them to find a solution. So there's a lot of threats, as you already saw from for the other waterfalls, but also the sea ducks, they are exposing also a major threat from the other sources of expanding wind farms, ingestion of debris and invasive species and oiling and so on. But one of the major is the bycatch, and it's considered as an accidental catch And mostly what I will be speaking, it's about the gillnet bycatch. And just shortly to give you an estimation, what is just recently we did. So it's a lot of seabirds are bycaught in different locations. And in the previous studies, it was estimated that in the Baltic Sea in 2013, bycatch is around 76,000 of birds. And recent study we just published recently last year, we estimated that even with the changing EU policy, fishery policy, etc., there is still a large bycatches ongoing. Around 87,000 birds might be bycaught in the Baltic Sea, and more than half is coming from the gillnet fisheries. And just alone in Lithuania, it could be estimated around from 1,500 to 3,000 birds annually. And most of these species are endangered or facing decline. And we did a study what the official results are going to the EU Commission and what is the real data. So we just compared the official reports of the 5 years from 2015 till 2020, when the Lithuania reported 6 birds, and in total we found a bycatch of 909 birds. So that's yellow square in the top, what is the official statistics says. And so we see a large problem that is underestimated, this problem. It's hard to achieve a good estimation or numbers in the regions of the different fishery practices and so on. But it was easier to work in Lithuania. And this is just a picture of composition of one fisherman bycatch per trip per year. It's not each trip there was a bycatch, but mostly, as you can see, there's long-tailed ducks, velvet scoters, red-throated divers, common scoters, and few other species. So we got a funding from BFN to continue the work because we were trying to find the solution from 2015, unsuccessfully testing some underwater deterrents like different lights and so on. But during that time period, we found that some of the mitigation measures might work if the deterrents would be above water or just change the fishing activity. So we tested two fishing changes. So it was kites attached to the gill nets and then the night setting. But additionally to that, we wanted to understand the behavior of fishermen and seabirds. So we tagged seabirds, and also fishermen was carrying the GPS um, to see how they move and how it's the overlap. So in the period of 4 winters, we worked with 3, 6, sometimes 8 different vessels. Mostly it's the data were collected from during the winter period when the sea ducks are coming for the wintering in the Baltic Sea, and the fishery it get more intense. And so it was self-reporting mixed with the onboard observer data collection, and also deployed GPS trackers and on the birds and the sea. So if you look to the map, how the fishing activities were distributed, so mostly it's the months on the bottom and the proportion of nets. So you can see that it's depending a lot on the weather and our altitude. So winter is very rough and there is not so many good gaps of the air that they can fish. But it's ongoing almost to the March from November. And then during that period, we collected also from the regular fisheries and a bycatch. So you can see what species are the most affected. It's the long-tailed duck, velvet scouter, the great cormorant, and some others. And in totally from 2021 till 2024 and 3 winters, we collected the data from those couple fishermen on the bycatch of around 750 birds. And as we see that there is a large bycatch and how it's were ongoing, we decided to end the project to add, not to add, but it was initially idea to check how the birds are moved, how they move there. So we used some innovative method to attach the transmitters on the back feathers, that they would not be deployed the lifespan of the birds, and they can be detached after some time. But we had to catch the birds different months to cover the entire season, so we catch during the night lighting. Probably is the most fun part of the project, apart the data analysis. But yeah, so we were working at sea during the night, attaching transmitters on the back of the seabirds. And after that, the birds were released, and in total we used 86 transmitters, but we got tagged 94 birds. Some of them transmitters were retrieved, or the birds were by caught. So we got to use more birds than we had transmitters. And so just going to show how the birds distributed and where they go, I just will show this as an example. A long-tailed duck, so they expanded the range not just in Lithuania, but also they collected the various data for the Latvian, Estonian, and Polish and Russian sites areas. So we tracked more than 33 long-tailed ducks, and we saw that there is a slight different pattern for the night and day movements. For the long-tailed ducks, it was not so high for them because the idea was to see how active the birds are at night and during the day. Maybe there is a time difference when they are not feeding and when they feeding most and so on. So this was one of the goals, to see the daily activity of the birds and the position. So we made the maps, how they distribute, and it's very species specific maps. So bentivores, long-tailed ducks, they spend most of the time around the benthic surface where they feed, long-tailed ducks on the blue mussel beds, velvet scoters on the sandy bottom, and the red-throated divers, where is the highest fish migration during the winter. It's mostly the small fish, pelagic fish, that they go to spawn in the Coronian lagoon. So they target them, and also some herring. But among that, we also use the depth sensor, not to use just the GPS points during the daytime and nighttime, but also we checked how they behave. So we got a tracks of most of the birds. They were also providing the diving patterns, how deep when they are diving, what the time of the day, and how much time they spent on the water. So we got each bird profiles, how deep were they diving. So some of the birds, they dived quite deep. There was one more diving up to 63 meters, if I remember correctly. Female, so they dive in really some deep places, but mostly they use depths of 20, 25 meters. Long-tailed ducks, they also can dive quite deeply, depending on the sites where they are located, but also they prefer, this is just some extreme dives, but they prefer shallow waters up to 20 meters depth mostly. And during the investigation, we also looked how the birds are behaving during the time underwater. So there is a time, and if you see to this graph, so this is the month. So it's November, December, January, February, March, April, and May. And you say you can see this is the day length. It's getting shorter during the winter time, and it's getting larger. So if you look to the red-throated diver, we can see that they dive. This is the sunrise, and this is the sunset. So the divers, they are mostly diurnal divers, and they dive just during the light period when they can feed. Long-tailed ducks, they have a positive, not a positive, but they have a different strategy. So during the dark periods, they dive also during the night to get the energy they need, but the diving is more than 50% less active. But from the March, they don't dive at night because the day length then is long enough that they can use just the daytime to get the energy. And similar pattern is seen with the velvet scoters, that they feed actively during the daytime, not so much in the night. They still continue feeding until about midnight. But then again, from the mid-February, they stop diving at night, and they just use the daylight even a bit more before the sunrise. They start diving, and this is showed us as a way or possibility to have a possible mitigation measures. Another active activity was to track the fishermen and to see where they are fishing, in what location. So on the right side, you can see the fishermen GPS points, and on the left side, you can see the well scout as well. There's no necessary deep analysis that we can see that the same location is covering both of the activities in the area. So also the joined map of the fishermen activities and seabird activities, we see that they overlap very strongly, and this is why we have such much a conflict between the gillnet fisheries, bottom gillnet fisheries, and in the eastern Baltic, northern Baltic, we have the birds and the sea. And so during these tests, we used so what we got using these two methods of night setting and kites. And this is the sample size of gillnets that it's not here, but what bycatch we have. From the control nets, we have 70 long-tailed ducks in bycatch, 11 velvet scouters, and so on. Using kites, we had reduced the bycatch a lot, and then the night setting, we reduced also bycatch a lot. And when we used combined this method, it was not initially our plan, night plus night setting with kites, but just the fishermen, sometimes they messed up a little, but in that case, we got quite nice additional result. What if to use this combination? So as you can see that there is already reduction much in the bycatch comparing with the different mitigation techniques. And so using predator-shaped kites, and it can reduce seabird bycatch by 54% compared to the control nets. And it's particularly effective for the sea ducks and long-tailed ducks that can reduce up to 72% bycatch. Night fishing, especially effective for daytime active birds, but it also can reduce seabird bycatch by 65%, and for cormorants, it was 100% reduction. Combined measures, this had quite small sample size, just 48 tests. We recorded 0 bycatch. So, in those combined methods, we can see that there is a real potential, but maybe we'll need to look more deeply to that. But even that, it really shows a nice bycatch reduction. So another question is how this mitigation affect the fish catch, if it's worth to use those. And the fish catch comparing with the regular control group was reduced by 11%, but even that was not statistically significant, but there was a variation from very large from the different catches at different times. But this is what it came up. So even that it's feasible for commercial fisheries with the low economic impact to use these mitigation measures. And then another question, what it raised up for us, it's more complicated graph, but I will try to explain. So it's the because the gillnets were set at different various times. So this is the time in relation to sunset. So it's -4 hours, -3, and there's the sunset. And this is the net time of sunrise when it's howled. So it's deployment time and howling time. And we find out that the most economic comparing with the fish catch and the bycatch reduction would be to use these green areas to deploy the gillnets. So even you deploy the gillnets 2 hours before the sunset, the birds are displaced from that location and you have very little chance of the bycatch. But it's important to hold the net not shorter than sunset, not sunset, but sunrise before. Even you just delay 1 hour after sunset, you can see that your bycatch is going already above the zero. So, and it's different for the different methods, night setting or kites with nights. So we found that these deployments up to 2 hours before the sunset and hauling them at sunrise could be the most optional for the fishermen because they have additional couple hours of the fishing time, and also they don't have to set the gill nets at the night time and so on. So actually using this approach that very low or effective cost, it's not expensive to use these kites or change the regulation of the fisheries and leaving the fish uh, for the fishermen to catch during the night or using the kites. It's economically feasible, and these can be adopted. And even if it would be adopted, it could save annually around 2,000 seabirds in Lithuania and up to 40,000 in the Baltic Sea if it would be using. And it's in Lithuania, we had even achieved that the funding from EMFF, European Maritime and Fishery Funds, that they are now supporting fishermen if they are using this nature-friendly solutions to reduce the bycatch and to use the kites for night fishing, and they can have a compensation for extra trips that they have to make if they're using night setting, or the compensation of kites and other costs if they're using kites. So they started just last year in the autumn, and I already see the difference in some fishermen that were collaborating with us in the previous years as the suppliers of the bycatch. We still don't have a full data, but we can see that this is working and they have a nice result to show and implement. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Julius. Really impressive to see these results of all these and the experimental approach. Thanks very much. I will put another question this time on the bycatch in the chat. So thanks very much for using that one. So thanks everybody for all the presentation. I think it's overwhelming the amount of information. So I give the floor for people that have already a question or a remark, and please try to raise your hand. If that doesn't work well, then just speak up. Opening the floor now for questions or remarks. There is nobody yet. Maybe I will try to open some of the Niels, when I saw the presentation, and thanks very much. I think one of the potential impacts, and maybe it's more related to habitat as such in your schedule, but I guess the measures that hunters take on their hunting ground, especially in some hunting estates. I know in Denmark, in the sea, where some of your information came from, it's not possible. But thinking of Spain, some of these hunting estates, they do massive activities on the ground to attract the species to their location with extra food and water. And maybe that's an important other element that contributes to the impact between brackets of hunters on a species.
Yeah, we might understand your question, and in my presentation of the work here, we have mainly been working with seabirds or coastal birds. But if it comes to the inland management, we see very often that hunters and the managers of private estates, that they modify the habitat with attractive elements, resources like, yeah, as you said, small wetlands, and then a lot of feeding. and in some cases, perhaps also other initiatives that could be seen also slightly positive because if the alternative is a big oilseed rape field and then hunters dig a hunt for duck hunting, then perhaps that's seen on a net basis better than just a big wet field or wheat field or whatever. But I think when it comes to the feeding, which is so enormous in most countries that I know, and very enormous in Denmark, that hunters attract birds with feeding with corn or with maize or with wheat or barley and so on. That's of course that first of all increases the local hunting pressure, giving hunters possibility for harvesting more birds than if it was a completely natural situation. But it also changes the feeding habits of these birds. I know that from practical management where I live, I have myself a small wetland where I don't feed, and the situation there is that if you don't feed the ducks, you won't harvest any because they are so attracted by places where they are fed. So in fact, this is also competition between hunters to attract the birds to the place where they are hunting instead of the neighbors. So this is a fight between hunters also, and there's a increasing opposition now against feeding of wild animals overall. That applies not only to birds but also to deer, which is also fed very intensively. And so I
Yeah.
think the feeding is one of the elements that is really a threat, not only to the feeding behavior and the extra harvest opportunity, but also it simply changes the migratory feeding migratory uh, patches and the system of the birds. So I think that's something that could be looked into on national level, and I also think it's something that should certainly be addressed on an international level. Many people do not realize how much there's going on, but this is a huge business in many places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks so much, Niels. Julius, I see your hand.
Yes, I have my hand up. I have a question for Rafael. Regarding this lead pellets that is stuck in the birds, is it possible to locate the region or the origin of this where the bird came? If it's migratory bird, it was shot in Russia, for example, or it was shot by these gun pellets, what is stuck in the muscles?
Good question. No, I don't think it's very easy. At least, well, you should look at the reaction around the pellet to know if it's has been in the few days before or it has been there for a longer time. Probably you have to see the how is the usually around the pellet there's a connective tissue when the pellet has been there for several weeks or months. No? But if the pellet has been shot by in the previous days, you will see no reaction around there, and you will see even the destruction of the tissue and the bleeding, etc. No? So it is can be a little bit different, but of course this is something that you have to explore pellet by pellet, I would say. I think, well, this is my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Rafa. Anthony, please.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for three fantastic talks. I've really enjoyed this. It's been really wonderful. Rafa, can I ask, is it possible, following on from Julius's question, is it possible with stable isotope of lead? Lead's got several different stable isotopes, as far as I understand. Is it possible to look at the origin of where the lead was mined in order to say something about where the lead shot comes from? Or is that complete fantasy?
It is very difficult. I mean, because the lead isotope ratios, yes, the same manufacturer can have in the same batch can have the same lead. Okay, and you could identify, you can say, okay, if I have the cartridge and I know this pellet and this isotopic composition and this animal, I can say, okay, it is the same. Okay, but if we have let's say from the same manufacturer another batch, it can be a different source of lead.
Okay.
1 year later. 1
Yeah,
year
okay.
later.
Okay, yeah.
Because, I mean, we have been doing this with, especially with bullets, and the same manufacturer for different type of bullets or different batches, you can find different isotopic ratios. And of course, it is going only to tell you something about the cartridge that has killed the animal, not the country or the location or the whatever, you know, because the market of cartridges is also international, and I think I mean, it can be done in a forensic way. Let's say if we have one case and we want to identify if this hunter has killed this animal, you could do, at least you can do this forensic study to have some more proofs, no, to say has been killed by this hunter, no, but for scientific studies at larger scales, I think it's quite a lot hard, no, to do.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Thank you.
We're coming on Neil's territory, of course. Niels, I see your hand.
No, this is just a comment connected to this territory and to Rafa's speech. In the chat, I put a link to a book that we got out last year, which describes the problem about lead ammunition, but also the solutions. So this is just for your information. And in fact, I still have some printed copies of this book. So if some of you are eager after a book to read at night when you cannot fall asleep, then I'll certainly send you a copy and just give me the address.
Yeah, thanks very much, Niels, and yeah, and thank you for all your support on trying to ban lead. I know you do a lot for that. Thanks very much. I see a question in the chat from Danai. To you, Julius, on the question if the kites to scare the ducks, if they were placed on both ends of the net, I guess above the water. And how long are these nets and the depth that the nets are being set?
Okay, so thank you, Danai, for the question. So we used kites tied together in one set, and one set it was in this our trials was 7 nets of 30 meters long tied together. So in totally we had a line of nets joined together of 210 meters. And from both ends there was a net on the buoy, and the nets were set in different depths, but mostly it's from 4 or 5 meters up to 11 meters depths, because it's the bottom nets, so they sit on the bottom mostly.
Okay, thank you. Then if you have additional points to your question, please raise your hand or just speak up. Any other questions or comments? Anthony, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hog the limelight, but Julius, I so enjoyed your talk. That was just a super study. Can I ask, maybe I missed at the end, I mean, are you issuing guidance? Is there a product that's coming out of this that we could all use? Because obviously we have huge numbers of bycatch drowning in Denmark, for instance, and I know it's the same in Poland and in Germany as well. So, I mean, is there some nice product where you can guide us in with sort of best practice? And even not knowing what the detail is of the way we fish, it strikes me there's so much to learn from what you've done.
Yes, there actually we are preparing a paper that the main result of the project of these fishing trials, what we just done. So it's already done, just we have to review the last time and submit. I hope it will be by the end of September. And there would be a report as we finishing this project. And yeah, so I think that report will be officially possible to locate somewhere.
Super, thank you.
Yeah.
I think especially the popular output would be good
Yeah.
to guide
Definitely.
policy because, yeah, I mean, obviously you need to base it on the science and you've got fantastic results, no argument. But I think the important thing is some consumables for both the fishing industry and the authorities.
We were working in connectivity with our national policymakers, so it's actually going on, so it's already implemented. And just to give this practice in other location, I think it could be repeated in different, because the fishing activity is quite similar across from the Denmark till the Estonia, so it could have a really nice result in the end.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. It's really super results. Fantastic stuff. Thank you.
For the question.
Yeah. Thanks, Julian and Anthony. Niels?
Yeah, I was also very impressed and excited by your talk, Julius. But this may be just as well a question also to you, Tony. I was just thinking about Denmark because my feeling that over the last 2 decades, whatever, 20, 25 years, the practice of using gill nets in Denmark has decreased because the fish population simply have decreased so much. I just wonder, would it be possible to relate the amount, the extensive, the intensity, but the amount of gill netting and the amount of bycatch of these species and the impact also on population and so on. I just wonder, Tony, if that was something that we could look into, and also Julius, if that is something that you have looked into in the Baltic area and in your country, is the connection between the level of fishing and the bycatch? Just a question or thought.
I can maybe jump in. So we looked, because we had this change of the fishing activity or the practice. Earlier, during the Ramona Gidelis time, it was mostly most dangerous nets is the white, large mesh-sized nets for the cod. Now, as you know, we have ban of the cod, most of the Baltic area. So what the fishermen still, they want to get the profit. So what they do, they fish that what is allowed, but in the larger, more actively. So they set more sets for the smelts, herrings, etc. So in this case, we looked even on that the bycatch, even they change or they don't use this mostly dangerous gill nets. The bycatch level, it's still high. It's still remaining very high comparing with the changed practice. Of course, it would be probably a different story if there would be still cod nets used or place nets used during the winter time. But yeah, that has a major also impact. And we saw from the earlier our studies in Romania that the bycatch in this larger mesh size, 40, 30 millimeters hour, is 18 millimeters mesh size. So it could be 3-4 times larger bycatch because it's much more easier for bird to just penetrate the head through that mesh size. And now what we can see, it's
okay.
Yeah, it's still a lot. Even the practice has changed.
Okay.
And can I answer your question to me, Niels? I think, yeah, one of the reasons that a lot of the gill fisheries have suffered in Denmark is because of our, I don't know what you call it in English, the ilsvin. You know, we have this problem with nitrogen runoff, which is actually killing huge areas of our inshore waters because the ecosystems are so damaged by eutrophication. And but there is still a massive problem with drowning in southern Danish waters, in the inner waters around the islands. And so we know quite a lot about it, actually. And we work with DTU and the Danish, I don't know what you call that, Danish Technical University in Denmark, and also the South Danish University. There's quite a lot of collaboration goes on with that. And we have an idea of where the problems are, which species are involved, and which fisheries. But there's been a sort of reluctance to do anything, and partly because I think we've not had the sorts of tools that Julius is now exposing us to, you know. So suddenly we've got some tools where we can do something. So yeah, I see enormous potential of rolling this out, particularly in Denmark. There's no doubt. But I'm also thinking all the other Baltic states as well. You know, there's it's such an exciting development. So yeah. We from the community, we really have to thank you, Julius. I think that's a super piece of work.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks. Ralph, I don't know if you've seen, there's a question in the chat for you that
Yeah.
if have you read it?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to answer in the chat, but yes, I can answer now.
So yeah, go ahead.
Yes, it's about the aging of this lead shot in the
Mhm.
this old lead shot in the tablas de miel. Yes, of course, they tend to oxidize and to produce to make um, like a layer of carbonates, lead carbonates. And I'm not sure if this is going to be more or less bioavailable. So this is something probably there's something in the literature I don't remember now, but and probably could be also done an experimental work. We have been doing some studies before on lead bioavailability with a simulation of the gizzards of a bird. So this is something that can be done. What we know is that this lead is contaminated the soil, the sediment. This is something, these results are, we have the results, but we haven't published them. But there's a very significant increase in the lead levels in the soil. So there's some degradation of the lead pellet. These carbonates are being released and they contaminate the lead around the soil around the pellets. But just the question here is the availability of the different forms of the different salts that are being formed around the pellet. I don't know if maybe Niels have more information about that.
Or Nikki, could I see his hand? Nikki is on this.
I just wanted to go on with this question to Rafa. If you compare the immediate impact of the lead shots that are available to the diving ducks or whatever, compared to the lead that is deposited into the soil of the wetland with the time of dissolving of these deposited lead shots, what will be the more impactful pollutant, the immediate digestion or the long-term pollution of the soil, if you have looked into that?
So do you mean if it is worse to have the pellets in a spherical form in the soil, or if it's going to be even worse to have the lead dissolve into the same? Is
Yes.
this the question? Yeah.
Mm.
Well, soils always have lead, and it is normal to have 10 ppms, for instance, in many soils. So 10 milligrams per kilo, no? Okay. Or even more. In many soils, you can have many normal soils, non-polluted soils, you can have 100 ppms, 100 milligrams per kilo. So one pellet is about 100 milligrams, no? 128 milligrams, no? In many cases, no? Number 6, I think, more or less about that. So one shot pellet dissolved, no? Disgregated into this kilogram is going to produce this 100 ppms, let's say. So well, you can measure that, no? You can calculate, but if you have a density that is less than 1 pellet per kilo, you're at lower levels, no? Do you mean? Can I? You follow me? Okay, it is the question is that lead is already present in most of the soils of Europe or in many soils in the world, and at these levels of 10 ppm, there's no soil without lead in anywhere in the world. Let's say, no? And the lead shot is going to increase this amount at what level? The double? Yes, probably. In some cases, it's going to be the double or even more. No?
Yeah, I guess the soil or even the water impact, the examples that I know from the studies is that near shooting ranges where you have very high concentration of lead pellets, that the discharge of that area, if that goes into a lake, we have examples from Finland, if I remember well, that has a massive impact on the water birds on that lake. But I think if I listened correctly. So it's really about the pellets, which is the most dangerous, that the birds eat the pellets and
Yeah.
they get it in their body and are that way.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Mm.
Niels, did you
Yes.
want to add something to that or not directly?
No, I can just say that
Okay.
we made a similar study in Denmark where we looked into a wetland in Western Jutland where there had been a ban on lead gunshot since 1986, and we looked at that 20 years later, and we still found massive densities of lead shot in that area. And as we believe that the compliance had been okay, perhaps not 100% in the beginning, but we believe that these lead shot we found uh, 6 years ago, or 8 years ago, they have been spread before 1986, or at least in the late 80s. We found that they had about the original size of what is tradition to use for hunting water birds in that area. And we even found that they had very distinctive sizes, shot 7 and shot 5 and so on. So we had a good feeling that they have kept almost the original size and thereby not really dissolved or left any lead or any other elements to the soil. We had a pilot project on that, and we could not find any significant differences between these areas with high densities of lead shot and controls nearby. We applied for funding for a broader study where we would also look into the lead exposure of invertebrates in that area to see whether invertebrates as a food source for some species, perhaps, yeah, many species, if they were contaminated. But unfortunately, we never found resources for that study. So that's something that we still would like to work with, because I think it's a very valid question. What's worse is that pellets are kept as pellets and then can expose birds that ingest them, digest them, or is it the lead that eventually is dissolved and then exposes the habitat? I would guess the first, also to echo what Rafa said, because lead is still yeah, we find that in most sediments, anyhow, also in non-exposed areas with lead shot. Just some reflections.
Yeah, thanks, Rafa.
Yes, there are some other studies in areas or in mining areas where lead poisoning occurs also because of the ingestion of contaminated sediment. But this contaminated sediment in mining areas has more than 100 ppms everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
we are talking even in places with 10,000 ppms. This is abnormal soil or sludge in a mining area in many places, in the bottom of some lakes or some reservoirs. So this is another issue, and so it needs some a bit higher levels of lead in the sediment to become poison. I mean, it's a matter of making a calculation of the exposure from the soil ingestion in each species, whatever. No? But in general, I would say that in these wetlands, the hunting areas, the most important threat is the lead pellet per se. It is going to contaminate the soil, of course, and we have seen, and this is what you say, Niels, probably depends on the background and depends on the water, it depends on the soil to have a much higher or lower dissolution, and to know the contribution of lead in the pellet into the total burden of lead of the soil. But it is going to contaminate in some level that soil in 100 years, 200 years, whatever, but it's going to increase the contamination. But it is much lower in general than the levels that we have in many of the mining areas or wetlands around mining areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks very much. I think we're about to close. Rafa, maybe I don't know if you saw the answers on your question and what's the biggest challenge to eliminate lead shot in wetlands. were lack of enforcement, like 50% out of 24 mentioned that, and then 25% the limited political will. Is that how you also see it, where we need to work on to have a better implementation of the lead ban in wetlands?
Where's the question, sorry?
Well, it was in the chat, but I will share it later on in the meeting. But the link to the question was that
Okay.
24 of the people now in the meeting
Okay, I
answered,
haven't
and
seen that.
50% said it's the lack of legislation, which is a problem for having a good lead ban implemented at the moment. And 25% of them said it's a lack of political will, which is probably related to each other.
Yeah.
Lack of enforcement of political will.
Yeah, yes, the enforcement is going to be very, very important, and the education of the hunters.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any other remarks or questions? If not, I really want to thank the speakers again for really, I think, great talks. We will put them on YouTube, the recording, and share with all of you. And as we heard that we really need to bring out some of these matches to a wider public. So please feel free to pass that on to others, that they can also see these results. But thank you very much, everybody, and have a nice day. And see you in the next webinar. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Have a nice day.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Afternoon. Thank you.